All right, hi everyone. I'm back up here with Yop again. Just to let everyone know, our submission deadline is 2 weeks from today. So you have all this week to work on it, all spring break to work on it, and then that Monday night, please send it in. We need it. So we're taking everything. We'll take poetry, short fiction, graphic design, visual art, any of that sort. You know, if you don't know, send it to yop@bethelks.edu just in case, or just send me an email or ask me a question. My name is Frank Driscoll. There we go. All right. Thank you.
Hey everyone, so SGA elections are coming up, so if you want to be the student body president or the vice president, there is a form you need to fill out. I think it's called the presidential candidacy form. That is located outside of our SGA office or in student life office. If you want to do this, please turn in the form by 3 p.m. on March 28th to Jamila.
Good morning. My name is Megan Leary, and I'm the registrar, and I'm here to remind you about enrollment for school year 25-26. So you have received a lot of emails from me in the past few weeks, but you do receive a lot of emails, so this is just a reminder. It opens up at 11:59 p.m. tonight. If you have not been reading those emails that I sent, that's a great place to start. You need to have met with your advisor and gotten clearance to register before you can enroll. You do enroll yourself on MyBC. I don't recommend trying to do it on your phone, so get access to a laptop when you are going to do that. The computer lab will be open long enough that you could go do it in the computer lab if you want to stay up tonight to do it. Do you have to stay up till midnight to enroll? No, you do not have to do it tonight for sure. But if you are going to be a senior and you have very specific classes that you may need next year, I would recommend it in order to make sure you get into those classes. If only one section of Bethel works for your schedule next year, if you are needing to get into business law that you need to register for right away, you might want to stay up to try to register. If a class won't let you in, don't freak out. It's probably because it's at the same time as another class, or you don't have a prereq, or there could just be an issue. If you have a student account hold, it's not going to let you register. There's a lot of possible reasons. Come and talk to us at the registrar's office if you do run into issues though. And when do you have to enroll by? Well, there's not a definitive deadline, but you have to enroll before you can do anything with housing or financial aid or athletic eligibility, so you do want to enroll sooner rather than later. New students, new freshmen start enrolling in April, so I would highly recommend you try to enroll by the end of March to make sure that you get first dibs on the classes that you want to be in. If you ended up on a wait list this year, this would avoid that if you register before the end of March. So come and stop by the registrar's office or email me or registrar@bethelks.edu if you have questions.
Good morning, y'all. My name's Lily. I'm with the admissions office. I'm a volunteer member on our Title IX team. Just giving y'all a friendly reminder that you received an email on March 3rd, that was last Monday, with our climate survey. Please fill it out if you have not already. With that, it asks questions about campus safety, student resources, and a sense of belonging on campus. Your opinion does matter. So if there's something you feel like Bethel really needs to add or change, something you want us to do for next school year, please let us know. If you've started filling it out and you decided I don't want to answer any more questions, please skip to the end and hit submit. We don't receive any information unless you submit the form. So if you filled out, you have some ideas that you want us to integrate into next school year, but you haven't submitted it, we won't hear your suggestions. It is 100% anonymous. We do not know who fills it out. We don't know who has or has not. All we know is right now 21 students have filled out the form. If you are not one of those 21 students and you have an idea, please fill out that form. If you have questions about it or are having trouble accessing that survey, please contact anyone in the Title IX committee or Janet Fulmer. She's our director for Title IX. Thank y'all.
Hey guys, I'm from Diversity Council. So on March 14th, it's Pi Day. We are going to have a drive where you bring in some perishables, and it'll be outside of the CAF from 11:15 to 1 basically, but it'll go on for the rest of the day. We'll just leave a bucket out there. So just bring a perishable and you get a pie, like the little personal pies. So yeah, if you have any questions, you can always DM us on our Instagram page, divco_KS, I believe. Yeah.
Our speaker for Convocation today is Doug Miller, Professor Emeritus of Biblical and Religious Studies at Tabor College in Hillsborough. And before you boo, I know how kind you can be to people from Tabor. Doug brings a wide breadth of biblical knowledge to our campus. He's published 4 books, including on Ecclesiastes in the Believer's Church Bible Commentary series, of which he continues to serve as the Old Testament editor. He received his MDiv from Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary and his PhD in Old Testament from Princeton Theological Seminary. He also taught students for 28 years, including both of your Bible and religion professors here at Bethel. Doug's presentation today, entitled Isaiah and Individual Vocation, is made possible by a generous endowment from the Hartzler Foundation in honor of former Bethel College President J.E. Hartzler and family, and corresponds to both the Basic Issues of Faith and Life course that's studying the book of Isaiah and the Vocation Seminar course. So if you're a senior or a sophomore, this particular lecture might have a lot in store for you. I would warn you, though, when I was in your seat, I sat through a biblical lecture very much like the one you're about to hear, and it turned me into a Bible major. So if you're not careful, it might get you too. Please join me in welcoming Doug Miller to the stage.
Thank you for that kind and somewhat ominous introduction. I appreciate the invitation from Professors Voth and Gorzen today to be here. It's been a real privilege to study Isaiah and to prepare for talking about it today. So you may wonder why you should pay attention to some writings that are over 2,500 years old. Some people read them to prove that the Bible is divinely inspired, regarding predictions about Jesus, for example. Others are looking for a glimpse into the future, like who's going to be elected president and natural disasters. Others read prophets like Isaiah because of their zeal for social justice. I think some people just want to stoke their crabby mood. A friend of mine heard that I was going to speak to you today about prophets in the Bible, and he suggested I borrow from the first 2 chapters of the book of the prophet Amos. I think he had in mind something like this. So the Lord roars from Zion. For 3 transgressions of Friends University, and for 4, it is being punished and its campus will burn. For 3 transgressions of Bethany College, and for 4, it is being punished and its campus will burn. For 3 transgressions of McPherson College, and for 4, it is being punished and its campus will burn. For 3 transgressions of Heston College, and for 4, it is being punished and its campus will burn. For 3 transgressions of Tabor College, and for 4 and 5 and 6, it is being punished and its campus will burn. And then if I were to follow the book of Amos, I would say some really nasty things about you, my current audience, today here on the Bethel campus. But I've decided not to do any of that today. So when people think about the prophets in the Bible, in addition to the idea of predicting the future, they often think about judgment. So what is judgment? Judgment essentially means that you did bad or you failed to do something right, and God doesn't like it, and God is going to punish you for it. In the book of Isaiah, there's definitely punishment right from the opening chapter. Woe, sinful nation, people laden with iniquity. And then a few verses later we hear, learn to do good, seek justice, rescue the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow. But prophets also have hopeful things to say, like Isaiah, and they help their audience imagining good things that God has planned. So that may seem confusing. Why is God saying both judgmental and hopeful things? I want to explore that a little bit with you today. I will start by noticing that judgment on the oppressors makes a lot of sense if you are an orphan or a widow or somebody in their position. So today I want to talk to you about Isaiah, but as has already been mentioned, where I'm going with that is to learn something about vocation. I believe God calls people like you and me who go to college and learn a profession to do important things in the world. So let's go right to Isaiah chapter 6, where the prophet reports on an amazing experience. So Isaiah says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The pivots on the threshold shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed and your sin is blotted out. So let's pause there. I'm sure a few questions have arisen for you about this scene. For our purposes this morning, I'm interested in this word holy that the seraphs are saying about God and Isaiah's response to what he's seeing. Enough information is given to recognize that Isaiah is seeing God in the holiest place in the temple, a room that's about a 30-foot cube. So similar maybe in height to our room here, and not quite as big or as expansive as what we have here, but we can get a feel for it perhaps. There's 2 cherub statues in there, winged creatures with a human head and a body of a lion, about 15 feet high. Together they form a throne, and there God is seated with feet resting on a box called the Ark of the Covenant. The hem of his robe fills the temple, suggesting a giant figure. The seraphs, probably 2 of them, flying fiery serpents, proclaim God's holiness. The pivots of the doorposts begin to shake. Perhaps we can imagine an earthquake happening here right now. Not a small Kansas earthquake, but one of those big ones they have out in California that really rattles stuff around. I would expect Isaiah to run for his life with all that's going on, but instead he's in a complete panic about his sinfulness. He figures he's a goner for being sinful in God's presence. When we consider God's holiness, we often think of God judging people or God being overpowering. Thankfully, a seraph brings a coal from the altar to purify Isaiah's lips. And if you look in the circle there, you might be able to see the little little fiery coal there. I don't know if these pictures actually help us or not, but I thought I'd try them out on you. So there are numerous indications in the book of Isaiah of God's love, but here's a simple one. God blots out Isaiah's sin. A second one is to commission Isaiah to go warn people of judgment, because the point of judgment is to prepare for hope. I want to repeat that. The point of judgment is to prepare for hope. We in our culture have a hard time understanding holiness About all we can do is think of someone who is maybe harsh or violent in some way. And then when we try to think about God as being loving, we sometimes picture God as a kind of a butler or a therapist. Somehow we need to hold on to the feeling of being terrified, while at the same time knowing that God completely loves us and wants the best for us. We simply need to say yes. Maybe it'd be kind of like Jesus washing his disciples' feet on top of Mount Sinai with lightning and thunder rattling around. I can still remember exactly where I was when it suddenly got through to me that God loves me just for who I am and not for what I do or don't do. And yet I was still accountable to God, and I still needed to be obedient. I wish for that realization for all of us here. I believe humans have a deep desire to come to God, and when we sense God's love, we're drawn to it. Humans are also terrified because God is holy, and when we sense God's holiness, we try to run the other way. I think a paradox is going on here. And I'm using the word paradox to mean something that seems contradictory but really isn't. So I'm going to use a Mobius strip as an example here. You know what those are. A Mobius strip has two sides and one side at the same time. Another paradox might be that less is more. So having less of something actually accomplishes more. Sometimes people have said that to me about my lectures, by the way. You may know the paradox that God is big enough to create the universe and small enough to know each of us personally. So God is both big and small at the same time. And Isaiah is one of many places in the Bible where we find that God is both holy and loving at the same time. Holiness makes us realize we are small and sinful and want to run away, while love lets us know we are valuable and desirable and draws us near. So Isaiah starts to realize that God is holy love. So now back to chapter 6. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And I said, "Here am I, send me." So finally we get to the actual call, God calling on Isaiah. The Lord has a task and needs someone to do it. Isaiah is willing and says yes. The next verses describe his mission, which sounds like a failure from the beginning. He is supposed to talk to people in order that they will not respond. If he is successful, no one will repent and be healed, or so it seems. One thing for sure, Isaiah knows his mission and his life will not always be easy. It sounds like the old question, if you try to fail and succeed, which have you done? However, God isn't telling Isaiah to fail. It's more like God is telling him, even when you do all that I ask of you, don't be surprised if people don't respond to your warnings. This text is cited many times in the New Testament. The point here, as elsewhere in the Bible, is that only those who are open to God's truth will find it. Isaiah did have success. He had the best kind of success. Isaiah did what God told him to do. Isaiah gathered disciples who learned from him and recorded his oracles. Isaiah's words have been treasured for generations, even before they were part of what we call the Bible. So is there anything here for us about vocation? Should we expect visionary call events like Isaiah had? I must direct you to your Bible and religion professors to answer that question. I propose 2 points for the story that we've been considering of Isaiah and God in the temple. First, being accountable to God and revering the holy, loving one is absolutely essential. Isaiah 40 to 55 insists that there is only one God. All the rest are fakes and frauds. The prophet Micah said it well. He has told you what is good and what the Lord requires of you, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. This is an excellent summary of the law material in the Bible, or in the Old Testament. Well, I'd like you to consider a kind of a triangle or a pyramid here. God needs to be at the top of that pyramid. Then justice and mercy take their place at the bottom 2 points. I think our culture is trying to do justice and mercy without walking with God. In fact, putting something else at the top of the pyramid, perhaps lots of other things at the top. Note what happens if you put money or material things up at the top there. You start to threaten justice and mercy. If we put power up there, it permeates all that we're doing. Ultimately, justice and mercy get threatened. Some justice things become too expensive. Seeking to promote mercy means a loss of political power. If you catch on to the kinds of things I'm talking about here. Having the true God on top will insist on and enhance mercy and justice. And of course, just what Isaiah means by mercy and justice, we need to really study and explore. Well, the second point here, like Isaiah, we will need some help in discerning what it means to be successful in our calling, and when what looks like failure is not really failure. As you live out your vocation, you sense your sense of call and purpose in life. What success or failure looks like is going to be different if you're in social work or coaching a sport or nursing or business, education, communication, or the natural sciences. So moving on to part 2, reflection on the servant songs in Isaiah 40 to 55. More briefly, a couple other points about vocation. So starting with chapter 40 in the book, there's a lot of good news and hope. The people have been in Babylon for over a generation, and they are about to be released to return home. One of the fascinating and mysterious parts of this section of Isaiah is its presentation of the servant of the Lord. The term servant occurs 36 times across the 66 chapters of Isaiah, and a lot of them start with chapter 41. There are 4 significant poems focused on the servant, and I wish to just quickly highlight a few of the characteristics that are mentioned there. So, without reading all of this, just to notice the things that are underlined here. He will bring forth justice to the nations. He will not cry out or lift up his voice. He made my mouth like a sharp sword. I will give you as a light to the nations, that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth. Sustaining the weary with a word. Who will declare me guilty? My servant shall prosper. He was despised and rejected by others. He was wounded for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. Well, before we reflect on the servant character, I think it's important to reflect on the suffering of God. Something we don't think about very much, I think, in the Old Testament, because there are numerous mentions of God's suffering in the book of Isaiah, as well as other parts of the Old Testament. So here's just a few of them. God suffered and became weary because of bearing the religious festivals and sins of the people. God suffered anguish for the sins of people, resisting judgment as much as possible. And God actually suffered along with people and their problems. So when we see that the servant suffers, we should not conclude that God sent someone off to do what God was not willing to do. We have only time for a few thoughts on the servant this morning. One is that we are back in the realm of paradox. Suffering from evil leads to triumph over evil. God actually works good through the suffering. But of course, the willingness of an innocent person to take on suffering is really an audacious perversion of justice and raises significant questions and concerns. I want to turn to the New Testament, if I can be so bold as to do that today, and consider how Jesus, to what extent does he really own this servant picture here and embrace Isaiah's suffering servant. And to do so, I'm turning to the commentary that Professor Mary Schertz recently published on the Gospel of Luke. So in Luke chapter 22, Schertz points out that the account of Jesus' preparation for his arrest and trial before crucifixion is very carefully structured. It begins with the prediction that the disciple Peter will deny Jesus. It then moves to Jesus' instruction to his disciples to take a sword with them when they travel. And they report that they have 2 swords, and Jesus says that will be enough. We then have Jesus wrestling in prayer in Gethsemane, asking the Father to take the cup away. Jesus is then confronted by an armed group, and one of Jesus' disciples takes a sword and wounds one of those coming to arrest Jesus. Jesus tells the disciple to stop and heals the wounded man. The sequence then concludes with the account of Peter denying Jesus. Well, Schertz believes something profound is being presented here by Luke's gospel. The initial 2 swords reflect a holy war way of fighting. You have a few weapons and a few people. You wait and watch and pray, and you trust God to come in and wipe out the much more powerful enemy. So when Jesus, after praying, "Not my will, but yours be done," tells them to put the sword away, he is adopting a position more like the suffering servant of Isaiah. However, Schertz believes the holy war and suffering servant models are being merged here to create a third one. So Jesus is actually living out a third way of doing things that's not exactly like either of those. So looking over Jesus' ministry, we see that he did not form a holy warrior army to take out the Romans. But also he wasn't nearly as passive and silent as the servant in Isaiah, although like Isaiah's servant, he used the sword of his mouth. So to quote Schertz, Luke envisions the followers of Jesus forging into the future of the kingdom of God as disciples who embody both the holy warrior and the suffering servant. It is a dynamic and forceful mix. In Acts, the followers of Jesus move boldly into a variety of situations with a fiery spirit and strong words, accepting suffering in the name of Jesus as par for the course. What seems to a modern audience to be an enigmatic and opaque ancient text is, based on first century understandings of oral literature, a clear and ringing call to reject redemptive violence as well as passive suffering. It is a call to courage and compassion in the most difficult of times. End of quote. So this may seem like another paradox, that Jesus can be both holy warrior and a suffering servant at the same time. However, Schertz is saying that the two are merged so that something different comes out of that. Characteristics of each of those drop off. So in terms of vocation, 2 final points to take home here. First is the basic concept of a servant. To serve is to give oneself for the benefit of others, thinking of their needs first. Jesus had a lot to say about being a servant and encourages us to think of ourselves as servants. He modeled being the lowest of servants when he washed his disciples' feet. He also lived out being a servant day after day after day in many other ways. In my reflection on employment work over the last decades, I have concluded that there are at least 5 basic motivations that cause people to work. So I want to share those quickly with you. One is what I just call staying alive. And staying alive is what millions of people in the world have to do, and could be the same for us. There's nothing shameful about it. It's just that we don't have a lot of options sometimes. A second motivation is what I call living for the weekends. I've certainly worked with people like this. It's a pessimistic and self-centered approach to work. The third one is empire building. So my empire, and I've also worked with people like this. It's hopeful, but still self-centered. The fourth one, sadly, is work addiction. And some people just don't know any other way but to keep on working. And so that's very enslaved, but self-centered. So the last one is the one I've been hinting at, and that is service. And serving is an approach to work that is hopeful and others-centered. For those who, so with this approach, even though you get paid for doing your job, which of course you should, you seek to provide for the needs of people as you do that. Jesus did this on a daily basis, as I mentioned. Also intriguing to me is that I think Jesus shows us how to be a healthy servant by allowing other people to serve him. I find that very interesting. We see Jesus doing both. He's not afraid to allow other people to serve him from time to time. Now, those folks like you who get a college education and learn a profession, serving can look like a whole bunch of different things. And so I'm going to just try this out on you. Maybe some of you will find something like yourself up there. Service takes a lot of different forms in the professions. So that's my first point, is to take on the attitude of a servant. The second one is just some possible attributes that Jesus modeled that have some elements of the holy warrior about them and some of the suffering servant. So I mention this cautiously for a number of reasons, but one, knowing that these are going to take different shapes according to the vocation and profession that you have. So advocating for justice, doing battle with your mouth as a sword instead of physical weapons, seeking your reward with God, being a light to the world, using words of encouragement, not fearing the insults of others, not doing violence, avoiding deceit, and being open to sharing the pain of others. So in conclusion, just kind of summarizing the 4 points I mentioned this morning, 4 elements that I think come out of the book of Isaiah that can help us with our sense of call from God or our sense of meaning and purpose in life. First one is a vision of God's holiness and love, making God alone your prime love and worship. For Christians, this will involve being a part of a faith community and likely some spiritual disciplines as well. Number 2, figuring out what success will mean in your profession and call, and recognizing the tension between success and failure. Third one, let service be your motivation in your vocation and your profession. And fourth, consider what qualities of the servant are healthy to embrace as part of the merging of the holy warrior and the suffering servant. Thank you for your attention today.
Okay, we need to fill about 5 to 10 minutes with questions. So, if you have a question for Doug, raise your hand, and we've got a microphone. While you're thinking of one, Doug, I've got a question for you. Thinking about Isaiah's call story, it struck me that God doesn't call Isaiah specifically. He calls anyone and says, who will speak for us? And Isaiah answers that call. Is there a place in vocation for that kind of call experience?
Yeah. Certainly, I think so. I mean, I think Trent is lobbing back to me what I tried to lob to him about, do we have these kind of visionary call experiences in our life? And I think some people probably do. But for most of us, it's simply recognizing the kind of work that God needs done in the world and realizing, hey, I could do that. I'm remembering some people that I knew. There were a godly older couple, probably in their 70s or maybe older when I knew them. They had worked for service organizations their whole life, and so the question came up, how do you know God is calling you to something? And they said, well, we just made ourselves available and something opened up, and then after that something else opened up, and then something else opened up. We just lived our life that way. And I just thought that I just really relaxed about that then. God directs us in some surprising ways, and sometimes we don't recognize those until we look back on it.
Thank you.
Yes.
When preparing for this convocation, did you learn anything new about Isaiah or anything that?
As I was preparing, did I learn anything new about Isaiah? I probably shouldn't confess how much new I really learned, because I was invited to speak as if I already knew a lot. So, yeah, I did. I'd always wanted to do some further research on just the editing of the book and the different possible prophets that were involved and so forth. So I found that just really intriguing. And then, as I mentioned last night, more recently some scholars are working with the kind of the final editing of the book. And so I was fascinated by that. I've been really intrigued by the whole issue of kingship in the Old Testament. If you look in 1 Samuel, you find out that God is really opposed to them having a king, but somehow allows them to have a king anyway. And then you see all the problems that happen with that. And then this servant comes along that seems to be a different kind of leadership. Well, I mentioned last night, Edgar Conrad has looked at Isaiah not exactly from that lens, but the whole question of leadership, and thinks that the book has been organized to remind us that kingship is on the way out. And so when kings are mentioned, it's almost always because they're dying. So in the one we read today, in the year Uzziah died, that's when I saw the Lord. So the Lord is on a throne. God is king. And so I was really intrigued by that.
Hi, thank you. So you mentioned working for survival and how, throughout the world, most people are working for survival. Can you talk about what it would be like, or any ideas you have, even if you are in that place of working for survival, like how you can center others through whatever your work is, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I don't know if I have much profound to say about that. What comes to mind is my summers during my college years working at a steel fabrication plant in Phoenix, Arizona. Phoenix has made the news in recent years because of the record-breaking heat that's been happening down there. Usually they'll cite the previous record during the summers that I worked out in it. And so I remember I think there were 10 days in a row when it was above 115 or something, So I wasn't doing that because I particularly enjoyed it. But what I tried to do in the midst of that was find a way to serve and have kind of a serving mentality. I don't know if I would have called it that. I was working with some really interesting characters there, and pretty rough and pretty crude. And so I was trying to somehow be a witness to these guys without necessarily using words. And one of the kind of crazy things that came out of that, because my own faith was really struggling at that time. There was my foreman, who was kind of the key, the epitome of the crudeness of the folks there, contracted cancer. And of all things, I was gone from there a year or two, I think, he contacted me and asked me to do his funeral. Just amazing. And there I was, my own faith kind of in a mess, and trying to minister to him and conduct his funeral. To me, that was just a crazy way of God working through me in a situation that I didn't want to be in, and apparently bringing some good out of that. I don't know if that's the kind of thing you had in mind, but certainly I'm not trying to belittle the difficulties of people that are struggling just to have any kind of food to eat. But to say, when we find ourselves in situations like that, let's ask God for help to make something good come out of it.
I'll ask a question while folks are thinking. Our seniors will soon get to have oral exams in part over the book of Isaiah. And one question that often comes up has to do with context. And I'm curious, if someone were to ask you, what about Isaiah's context is most important for understanding what's going on here, what would you say?
Probably two possible answers there, and I don't know actually how you asked that question or what you have in mind, but two things that come to my mind. Of course, the historical and cultural context, a lot of violence going on. You've got big kings beating up on little kings, and Isaiah is trying to encourage the kings of his nation to trust in God to protect them and not be calling on the bigger kings for help. The other is the literary context, which is the second way of approaching Isaiah. It's trying to understand how this material is being organized to communicate to us. So I think both of those are really important in hearing what the book has to offer us. Somebody up here in front, or about 4 rows back.
Hi. Who's your favorite of the major prophets?
Favorite of the major prophets? By major, do you mean Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel? That's a very good question. Probably a few years ago, I would have said Jeremiah, because he cries out in pain in a way that is just astounding. It's very Job-like. Jeremiah is doing exactly what God asked him to do, and he's getting thrown into pits and beat up. And he comes back and complains to God and saying, you said that these people were going to be judged, and I told them to be, I warned them about that, and you're not judging them, and I'm being hurt, and God, in so many words, each time says, you're right, here's your next message. And that was just astounding to me. It was one of those places where I realized that the Bible takes doubts and frustrations really seriously, but it doesn't have a pleasant answer to that. So I could certainly pick things out of all three of those major prophets that I appreciate, but I'll just mention Jeremiah because of that today.